The candle flickers. Not dramatically, no haunted gust or crashing window. Just a little bend in the flame, like it remembered something embarrassing and didn't want to talk about it. You're in a modest 16th century townhouse in Ferrara. The kind with uneven floorboards, stone stairs that creak before you step on them, and wooden shutters that insist on rattling even when there's no wind. Outside, the alley is quiet. Not peaceful, exactly. Just exhausted. Like it's been awake since the plague and would very much like to lie down. The hour is late. The fire is low. Somewhere, a cat you don't own is knocking over a clay pot you don't need. And here you are, sitting beside a half-empty pitcher of red wine, fighting sleep because someone told you that yawning too much might let something in, not just a cold draft or a sneaky spider. No, something else, something you can't name, but the neighbors whisper about. Welcome to Italy in the 1500s, where science is on the rise, the Renaissance is hitting its stride, and yawning might accidentally summon a ghost. You probably won't make it through this day. But if you do, please like and subscribe gently with the reverence of someone closing a chapel door. And in the comments, tell us your local time and whether you've yawned yet tonight. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. And try to keep your mouth closed, just in case. It starts with a cough. Not yours. The baker across the street. He's been coughing all morning, loudly, dramatically, as if trying to win sympathy and sourdough points at the same time. You pull your cloak tighter, though the chill is mild. You're not worried about illness. You're worried about what? Comey's with the second yawn. First is fine. You're tired, normal, human. But the second? That's when old ladies start crossing themselves. That's when your cousin starts muttering prayers that sound suspiciously like gambling debts. In 16th century Italy, people believe that yawning opens more than your mouth. It opens a space, a little window, a small tear in the fabric of the world that something cold might slip through. Here's your historical fact. In some parts of Renaissance Italy, yawning in public was considered spiritually risky. Folk belief held that invisible spirits, particularly restless souls, or spiriti vaganti, could enter your body if your mouth wasn't covered in time. The baker yawns once, loudly. Doesn't cover his mouth. You stare at him like he's just declared war on his own soul. Inside your house, the walls creak. You tell yourself it's the timber settling. Not a ghost. Definitely not a ghost looking for a warm host body with a decent wine collection. Your neighbor stops by. She's 97 if she's a day. Wears black every season. Claims she hasn't sneezed since her wedding. She sits without asking, hands you a bundle of dried herbs, lavender, rosemary, and a thin string of garlic. Hang this by the window, she says, and stop yawning after sundown. You ask why. She doesn't answer. She just narrows her eyes like she knows. Something the priest won't say out loud. You hang the herbs anyway. They smell like soup and superstition. Obscure tidbit. It was common in parts of Italy to keep cloves, rosemary, or even tiny bells near one's bed to ward off spirits that might arrive via breath or breathlessness. That night, you light a single candle. You stare at it too long. You yawn. Just once. The wind taps the shutters. You tell yourself it's nothing, and the candle flickers again. Historians still debate whether these beliefs were rooted in ancient Roman funerary customs, Christian fear of possession, or just a shared dislike of open mouths. But tonight, as your eyes drift shut and the fire dies low, you swear you hear footsteps, and no one in the house is awake, not even the cat. Morning arrives like an apology. Pale, sheepish light leaks through the shutter, cracks as if embarrassed by how dramatic the night was. You wake up in your chair, neck sore, wine untouched. The candle burned down to a waxy puddle. The herbs still hang by the window, looking smug. You're fine, you think. You shuffle to the door and open it slowly, half expecting a procession of ghostly visitors to be waiting with polite grievances. Instead, bread. Someone's left a loaf, still warm. Probably the baker. Probably not possessed. Probably you eat in silence. Watch a stray dog nose through the alley. Somewhere above, laundry flaps like defeated flags. You stretch. You yawn. A gust of wind immediately slaps the door open wider. Coincidence. You mutter. That aloud. Coincidence. But you close your mouth a little faster this time. Here's your major historical fact. In 1538, an Italian physician named Girolamo Mercurial wrote that yawning was a natural way for the body to expel excess heat from the brain. But among the common folk, explanations tended to involve spirits, omens, or bad humors drawn in through the mouth. You decide to visit the apothecary, not because you're sick, just curious. Maybe he has something for post-yawn dread. His shop smells like dust, lemons, and a mild sense of superiority. He raises an eyebrow as you enter. You look like someone who yawned too confidently. You don't deny it. He offers you a vial of air-sealing oil, tells you to dab it under your nose before sleep, keeps spirits out, or at least keeps them mildly confused. You buy too. Also suggests avoiding mirrors at night. You ask why. He says, you ever see something move in one, but you didn't? You leave quickly. Back at home, you place the oil by your bedside. You draw the curtains early. You yawn again, this time. You cover your mouth with both hands. Maybe even a sleeve. You remember the baker. You remember the flickering candle. And you start to wonder, when they said spirit, did they mean ghost or something else? Obscure tidbit. One 16th century superstition held that certain ghosts only entered homes where someone had yawned 3 times in a row without crossing themselves. This led to accidental elbow jabs at dinner parties, Historians still argue whether the fear was rooted in actual belief or just a really successful way to get people to stop talking during sermons. Not as night falls again, you light 2 candles, you sprinkle the oil, you hang a second herb bundle. And when you finally do yawn, you whisper no vacancy, just in case. The 3rd night always feels different, not because of anything specific. Nothing moves, nothing moans, but something shifts, like the house itself is holding its breath. You sit by the hearth, the fire low and crackling like it's trying not to wake the furniture. You've positioned the garlic bundle on every sill. The mirror is covered with a dishcloth. The oil's beneath your nose. You smell like soup and superstition again. And yet, there's a draft that doesn't have a door. You press your fingers to your temple. You've been thinking about the yawn too much, giving it too much weight. It's a bodily function, not a paranormal summoning. You know this. You do. Still, when you open your mouth to yawn, you clamp it shut so quickly your jaw clicks. That's fine. Clicking jaws don't invite spirits. Probably. Here's your historical fact. By the mid-16th century, yawning was considered not just socially impolite, but spiritually dangerous in some Italian city-states. Sermons regularly warned the faithful to cover their mouths, not out of courtesy, but to prevent spiritual ingresso, the entrance of invisible entities, including demons or wandering souls. You recall the priest last Sunday. He yawned, wide, lazy, unbothered. You remember how his candle flickered too. Coincidence. Right? You sip your wine and reread the old letter from your cousin in Venice. She writes of masked balls, foggy canals, and one unfortunate night where 3 people yawned during a funeral and the body sat up just enough to make the soprano faint. She's always dramatic, but still obscure tidbit. In some parts of Renaissance Italy, actors were forbidden from yawning on stage during religious dramas. If they did, the performance had to be paused and the stage re-blessed. You turn your chair to face the wall. Less chance of catching your own reflection. Fire crackles again, louder now. You think about dreams, about breath, about how many people were buried without their mouths ever closing. Historians still debate whether these beliefs were rooted in early Christianity or simply a leftover fear from ancient burial rites where yawns were seen as the soul stretching just before escape. You do not yawn. You sleep sitting up. And you dream of nothing, which somehow feels worse. The morning air smells like burnt rosemary and something faintly metallic, like an old coin rubbed between fingers. You step outside to sweep the stones. The alley's damp. A neighbor passes, nods politely, then crosses herself without breaking stride. You check your reflection in a puddle. Still you, probably. At the market, the fishmonger refuses to sell to a man who yawns twice. Says it's bad luck. Says it opens the water. No one knows what that means. but no one asks either. You point at the squid. He squints. Says, "You're the yawn guy." You say nothing. You buy fennel. It's safer. Back home, you hear knocking. 3 short taps. Like someone polite. You open the door. No one. You look down. A small, dried frog sits on the step, tied with red thread. You do not touch it. You bring it inside using a dustpan and tongs. You place it on the table. You stare at it. It stares back. Probably. You try not to yawn. Here's your major historical fact. The idea that yawning could summon spirits was tied closely to breath itself, considered a carrier of the soul. In Italy during this period, breath was believed to be not only life-giving, but spiritually permeable. A yawn, uncontrolled, was seen as a moment of vulnerability, an invitation. You start marking the door with chalk. Not because you believe, but because belief is louder than logic when you're alone at dusk. Obscure tidbit. Some 16th century Italian households hung tiny mirrors above their doorways, not to check their hair, but to confuse spirits who entered uninvited. It was said that a ghost, upon seeing its own face, would forget why it had come. Try it. You hang a mirror, then cover it, just in case. Later, when you sleep, your breath fogs the window in slow patterns. You wake up to find a perfect circle drawn in the condensation. No handprints. No writing. Just the circle. Historians still argue whether such symbols were part of folk magic, sleepwalking phenomena, or simply overactive imagination steeped in candlelight and wine. You pour yourself another glass. And for the first time, you say good night to the air. Just to be polite. There's a knock at the door again. This time in daylight. Which is, somehow, worse. You open it slowly. It's the priest. He smiles like someone trying not to look directly at your garlic. His robes smell faintly of myrrh and burnt parchment. "I heard," he says gently, "you've had some nights." You nod, not enthusiastically, just enough to be polite. He glances over your shoulder at the dried frog still resting on your shelf like it pays rent. He steps inside without being invited, which you're pretty sure breaks some kind of ghost rule, but he's not floating, so it'll do. The priest makes tea without asking. Leaves the water just a little too cold. "I'd like to bless your home," he says. You say nothing, but you do move the frog into the other room. Here's your major historical fact. Throughout 16th century Italy, home blessings were not just for weddings or illness. They were often requested after multiple family members had yawned in a short period of time, especially following dreams involving shadows or mirrors. The priest mutters softly in Latin. The candle flickers. Again, he stops midway through a prayer, looks at the mirror on your shelf. You forgot to cover that one. He gently turns it toward the wall. You say, "Superstition?" He says, "Experience." Obscure tidbit. Some priests in Renaissance Italy believed that mirrors were not reflective objects but windows, and that certain yawns weakened the glass. He blesses the window frame, the teapot, the ink bottle. You don't ask why. Then he yawns. Long, slow. You stare. He smiles tiredly. Too much incense. But the candle doesn't flicker this time. It bends sideways like it's bowing. Historians still debate whether clergy encouraged these yawning beliefs or merely tolerated them to keep the peace. As he leaves, he pats your shoulder. If you dream of water, burn mint. You ask why. He says, it floats. You dream of water. Not a sea, not a river, just water, flat, endless. UNMOVING. And a single chair in the middle of it. You wake up before you reach it, or maybe after. The room smells like mint. You don't remember burning any. You check the mirror. Still turned, still covered, still intact. The frog is gone. You don't panic. You sigh. You make coffee. Mid pour. You yawn. Long, loud. The kind that stretches your back and your future. The kitchen door creaks open. You say coincidence with your mouth barely closed. It doesn't help. You open the door. Outside, a child stares up at you, barefoot, covered in ash. No expression, no explanation. Just ash and silence. You blink. They're gone. Here's your historical fact. During the 1500s, it was believed that wandering spirits could briefly take the form of children, especially those who had died without receiving last rites. These forms were said to be brief, like echoes. You sweep your step. You don't find ash, but your broom smells faintly of salt. You decide to visit your cousin, the one in Venice. It's not running away. It's recalibrating the atmosphere. You pack lightly. One scroll, one oil vial, a mirror you can fold. On the carriage ride, the driver yawns. You offer him mint. He takes it without asking why. Which says a lot about Italian carriage drivers. Obscure tidbit. In some towns, it was common to tie a red ribbon to a horse's bridle if a passenger had yawned within the hour, meant to keep spirits from following the trail. You arrive in Venice to fog so thick it feels personal. Your cousin greets you with wine and too many candles. She's in the middle of burning a scroll from a dream she refuses to keep in the house. You ask her what it said. She says, it didn't. It whistled. Historians still argue whether dreams carried meaning or if meaning was simply added later after too much wine and not enough sleep. You yawn. The candle bends, and across the room, the mirror tilts. Venice does something strange to time. Maybe it's the way sound gets caught in the alleyways. Maybe it's the fog that makes you feel like you're walking through someone else's dream. Or maybe it's just the gondoliers who take exactly as long as they please. Your cousin's apartment leans ever so slightly. Not structurally, emotionally. The kind of place where the furniture looks like it just finished arguing. She hands you a cup of tea and immediately launches into a story about the last person who yawned at her dinner table. He claimed it was the wine, she says, pouring more. But his candle went out mid-sentence. We all saw it. You ask what happened next. He got quiet, she says. Then he left his own coat behind. The tea tastes like regret and sage. You sit by the fire. A new candle burns, high, steady. You try not to think about yawning. You really do, but the moment your body relaxes, your jaw stretches. You catch it, cover it, swallow it like a sneeze at a royal banquet. The flame dips anyway. Your cousin doesn't react. She just hands you a tiny bell and says, if it rings, don't answer. You nod. You don't ask why anymore. Here's your historical fact. Bells were believed to protect against invisible spirits during sleep. In 16th century Italy, placing a small silver bell near the bed was said to disrupt spiritual movement, especially if a yawn had gone unanswered by a prayer or gesture. That night, you sleep under too many blankets and not enough logic, and sometime, near dawn, the bell rings once soft, but enough you open your eyes. Everything is still, except the candle. It's gone. Obscure tidbit. Some Italian households believed if a candle disappeared during the night, it had been borrowed by the dead to light their way through the dream world. Historians still debate whether this was a metaphor for lost thoughts or an actual concern over wax theft from the afterlife. You light another then yawn behind your sleeve, twice and whisper, you're not welcome. Just in case. You spend the next day walking the Venetian alleys with the bell tucked in your coat pocket. It doesn't ring, but it feels like it could. Your cousin insists on taking you to a bookstore run by a man who once sneezed during an exorcism. The shop is dim, damp, and smells like secrets that haven't paid rent. The owner doesn't speak. He just gestures you toward a shelf labeled Respiro e Ombra, breath and shadow. You find a book bound in red thread, no title. The first page reads, if you must yawn, do so facing east. Spirits hate the dawn. You buy it. You don't ask the price. He doesn't tell you. Back home, your cousin makes fennel cakes. You eat 4. You want 5. As you wipe crumbs from your sleeve, she says, you haven't yawned since lunch. You hadn't noticed. She adds, that's when they start listening harder. You sip wine to keep your mouth busy. Here's your historical fact. Certain Renaissance texts linked yawning to planetary alignments, especially lunar ones. It was believed that the moon's phase could thin the veil between body and spirit, particularly during waxing crescents. You glance at the window. Of course, it's a waxing crescent. Obscure tidbit. Some Venetian dreamers swore that yawns during moonrise pulled dreams from the sea rather than the self, and thus required salt under the bed to keep them from becoming tide-bound. You sleep with a pouch of sea salt under your pillow. You dream of boats with no sails, voices with no mouths. You dream of someone asking very softly, "Are you done breathing yet?" You wake up before you answer. The bell is still, but the mirror is turned, and your reflection isn't facing you. You don't speak of the mirror, not to your cousin, not to yourself, especially not to the mirror. That feels like exactly the sort of thing that invites a dialogue, and frankly, you've had enough house guests lately. The bell stays by your bedside. The salt pouch now has a friend, a dried sprig of sage tied with red string, tucked under your pillow like a bedtime bribe. You spend the morning reading from the red-threaded book. Most of it is handwritten in a script that looks like it gave up halfway through each sentence. But one line stands out, underlined 3 times. When the breath is open, so too is the path. You look up. The window is slightly ajar. You definitely closed that last night. Here's your historical fact. In 16th century Venice, it was believed that windows left open overnight could act as spiritual conduits, especially during transitions between sleep and wakefulness. Some homes were designed without east-facing windows altogether. Your cousin walks in holding a small vial. "This," she says, "is dream thickener." You blink. She shrugs. "Fennel oil, clove, and just enough wine to confuse the senses. It makes dreams heavier, slower, less penetrable. You dab it behind your ears like perfume. It smells like nervous soup. The night creeps in. You don't yawn. You try not to yawn. But you feel it pressing on the edges of your throat like a secret itching to be let out. You bite your sleeve and hum softly until the urge passes. Obscure tidbit. Some believed humming could stir the breath and break the rhythm required for spirit passage during a yawn, a protection technique used often by musicians and monks. You fall asleep humming. And in your dream, you're back at the bookstore, but this time the shelves are empty, except for one book, bound in your handwriting. You wake up with the taste of fennel still on your tongue, and your hand resting on a scroll that you're certain wasn't there last night. Historians still debate whether such scrolls were real or imagined. Some claim they were physical manifestations of subconscious fear. Others say, quite plainly, ghosts like paperwork. Your cousin says it's time to leave Venice. Not because of anything specific. No dramatic hauntings. No flaming objects. Just a general consensus that the air around you is getting crowded. You pack your bag. Leave the scroll untouched. Let the frogs stay wherever frogs go when they're done warning people. As you board the boat to leave, the gondolier glances at you and mutters, "Don't breathe too deep." The water remembers. You nod like that makes perfect sense. Because somehow it does. The ride is silent, except for the creak of wood and the occasional sigh from the canal. You glance down. The water is unusually clear. You see your reflection. It doesn't blink. Here's your historical fact. Some Venetian texts suggest that reflections in water were not reflections at all, but watchers, entities drawn to the moment of self-recognition, especially when the subject was between sleep and wake. You reach land, shake off the chill, and continue your journey south toward Florence. Your next stop, a monastery known for its silence and its strange approach to dreams. Upon arrival, the monks hand you a wooden mask. No explanation, just polite insistence. You wear it. It's surprisingly comfortable. They call it il respiro lento, the slow breath, a tradition where, for 3 nights, the mouth is covered entirely during sleep, not for health, not for modesty, but for protection. You ask what from? A monk writes, carefully, echoes that never learned how to leave. You decide not to yawn for the rest of the week. Obscure tidbit. In some Florentine circles, it was believed that repeated yawns could leave a breath trail, a lingering path that something unseen might follow days later, like breadcrumbs made of vapor. That night, you sleep under painted ceilings and beside a bowl of still water. You dream of a corridor with no end, and candles that light only behind you, and a voice whispering, "You've left the door open again." You wake with your hand over your mouth, and the bowl of water still untouched now has 3 ripples. As if something dipped in. The monks don't mention the ripples, but they do hand you a new mask, slightly heavier, with a faint scent of cedar and beeswax. The kind of scent that makes you think of old libraries and doors that shouldn't open too easily. You wear it. You don't ask questions. That feels like a rookie mistake by now. During the day, you help in the garden. The soil is rich, dark, and unnervingly quiet, like it knows things it hasn't told the seeds yet. You try to relax. Breathe slowly. Eat stew that tastes vaguely of thyme and caution. The bell tower chimes once every hour, though no one winds it. You stopped wondering why after the second night. You yawn once during a stretch. Not big, not loud, just enough. The bell chimes twice that hour. You don't tell anyone. Here's your historical fact. In early modern Florence, some monastic orders believed breath was not merely physical, it was spiritual currency. Yawning, to them, meant releasing unspent intention into the air, where it might be taken up by listening entities. You sleep that night with the mask on tight, and a salt line drawn across your window ledge, but you still dream, this time. The dream is silent, not just quiet silent. Like the world's been put on mute. You're walking through the monastery, but every monk has their back turned. Their shadows stretch the wrong way, and someone is walking beside you. But you can't turn your head to see. You wake up sweating under 3 blankets. The window is cracked open. Again, obscure tidbit. Some Florentine families placed a feather across the crack of a window at night, not for temperature, but to see if it moved. If the feather had shifted by morning, it was said a whisper had passed through. Your feather is on the floor. You don't pick it up. You pack your things quietly. The next morning, a monk hands you a pouch of dried mint and doesn't say goodbye. Historians still debate whether the monastic practices were spiritual safeguards or early psychological treatments disguised as rituals. You don't care. You just want one full night of sleep. Florence fades behind. You like a dream you only half remember. You arrive next in a hill town called Sovana, the kind of place where time walks slower than people. You rent a small room above a cobbler's shop. The ceiling is low. The bed is lumpy. The shutters creak even when there's no wind. In other words, perfect. You eat dinner by candlelight. Bread, olives, and a stew with enough garlic to make even the dead reconsider. For a while, nothing happens. No dreams. No ripples. No bells. You start to think maybe it's past. Maybe the yawn curse or whatever this was just needed time to unravel itself. You let yourself breathe deeply. Yawn once, absent-mindedly. Then again. And on the third yawn, the door opened slightly. It was locked. You check the latch. Still secure. Still cold. You step outside to clear your head. The air smells of sage, wood smoke, and something metallic again. Like someone dropped a coin in your thoughts. A neighbor passes and says, "You've opened it." You ask, "Opened what?" She just smiles with too many teeth and says, "You'll know when it closes." You go back inside and light another candle. This one's thicker, less likely to flicker at inconvenient metaphysical moments. Here's your historical fact. In rural Tuscany, yawning was associated with door breath, a phrase used to describe moments when the tuna, physical and spiritual thresholds thinned. It was believed that the third yawn in a sequence was the most dangerous. You cover the mirrors again, even the little one on your spoon. Obscure tidbit. Some travelers in this region carried spoons carved from rowan wood, believing they could reflect only honest images. You sleep that night with a spoon under your pillow. You dream of a room made entirely of open doors. You wake with your coat on backwards and the mirror somehow reflecting a window that doesn't exist. Historians argue whether such accounts are superstition, sleep paralysis, or echoes of an oral culture trying to explain what never quite made sense in the daylight. You blow out the candle, and the smoke curls toward the door, like it remembers how to leave. You try to ignore it. You do your laundry. You sweep the floor. You reheat your garlic stew and pretend it still tastes like control. But there's something about the way the candle wax never drips straight anymore. It curves toward the doorway like it's leaning to listen. You speak less. Breathe shallower. Try to only yawn into your sleeve, though it's starting to feel like your body is plotting against you. The cobbler downstairs knocks gently, hands you a pair of slippers you didn't order. I made them last night, he says, voice quiet. Woke up mid-dream. Thought they were for someone who walks in their sleep. You take them. You don't ask questions anymore. That night, you leave the slippers at the foot of your bed. In the morning, they've moved. Not far. Just turned slightly. One pointing toward the door. One still facing you. It's not a threat. It's worse. It's familiarity. Here's your historical fact. In the 16th century, Italian households often arranged shoes a particular way near beds, believing their orientation could influence dreams or repel unwanted dream visitors. Shoes turned inward were said to confuse spirits trying to follow your path. You spend the day facing mirrors and not blinking. Just in case, your neighbor, the one with the smile full of teeth, passes you a pouch of peppercorns and mutters, for when it stands at the foot of your bed, you say nothing. Obscure tidbit. In some parts of Tuscany, pepper was burned like incense to repel invisible presences. The smell was said to sting entities unused to living breath. That night, you burn one peppercorn. It smells sharp, earthy like anger disguised as perfume. You sleep sitting up. You don't dream. But the slippers move again. And this time, you hear a soft breath that isn't yours. Just one, like someone deciding whether to speak. Historians still debate whether this kind of presence is real, metaphorical, or a symptom of prolonged sleeplessness. But historians rarely sleep in creaking inns with pepper smoke curling under the door. You do. You leave Savannah before dawn. No candle, no stew, no note. Just footsteps that feel a bit too slow for your heart. The road is quiet. The wind forgets to show up. You pass a chapel with one broken window. A bird perches inside, watching the sun rise backwards. Or maybe that's just the angle. You reach a hill overlooking a field of olives. They sway like they're whispering things you're not meant to hear, and somewhere in your chest, a yawn bubbles up uninvited, unasked for, almost let out. You hum instead. Not a song. Just enough to muddle the rhythm. It works. Mostly. You find a shepherd sitting by the path. He doesn't look up. Just says they follow breath, not footsteps. You say nothing. Keep walking. But your own breathing feels heavier now, like you're dragging it behind you. That night, in a small farmhouse lent by an old woman with one working eye and too many dried herbs, you make tea, chamomile, mint, and something labeled only as not for mornings. You sip it anyway. Here's your historical fact. Some 16th century Italians believed breath could leave the body while sleeping and return with visitors. These dreams were known as passi silenziosi, silent steps, and were said to leave no memory, only fatigue. You place a bowl of salt water beneath your bed, a bell beside your pillow, a stone in your left shoe. Obscure tidbit. Placing a small stone in one's Chew while sleeping was believed to weigh down the soul so it wouldn't drift during rest. Too much drifting, they said, was an invitation for company. You dream of walking through fog. Your footsteps make no sound, and beside you, again, that same quiet breath. But this time, it matches yours. You wake up feeling rested, which is more alarming than anything. Historians suggest that peace after haunting may be a sign the presence has moved in, not on. You smile, weakly, and for the first time in days, you yawn without fear. The mirror fogs gently and does not move. You stay in the farmhouse longer than you meant to. The old woman doesn't mind. She only speaks in verbs, mostly related to boiling things. Simmer, she says when you seem anxious. Steep when you ask too many questions. Each morning, she burns something in a small clay bowl: pepper, rosemary, dried apple skins. You don't ask the recipe. You just breathe it in and feel your thoughts stop pacing. The mirror on the wall stays covered. You leave it that way. It's become more of a suggestion than a surface now. One morning, she leaves you a folded note beside your cup. It says, if you must leave, leave part of your breath behind. You don't ask what that means. You just stand outside that afternoon, exhale into the wind, and hope the breeze knows what to do with it. That night, you sleep easily. You don't cover the mirrors. You don't draw salt lines. You don't hold the bell, and still nothing stirs. Dream of a quiet library with no books, only chairs facing each other. Someone offers you a seat. You sit. You both breathe. No words. No yawns. Just the stillness of being seen without fear. Here's your final historical fact. In southern Italy, it was believed that peace after prolonged unrest meant one had either paid their spiritual debt or made a pact without realizing it. The outcome was the same: quiet at last. Obscure tidbit. In a few rare cases, people carried with them a small sealed vial said to contain their final breath. When they died, it was buried unopened. The breath remained theirs forever. Historians can't agree if this was metaphor, superstition, or an act of resistance against being remembered the wrong way. You don't leave the farmhouse immediately. You just take one more deep breath. Let it out slowly. Feel it settle around you like dust in candlelight. The air is soft now. You lie back on your pillow, the weight of the night gently pressing down but no longer heavy. Just enough to keep your thoughts from floating too far. The room is still, the way old houses grow still when they know you've made peace with them. The candle flickers in its dish, not as a warning this time, but like a lullaby in flame. Your breath is slow, quiet, unnoticed by ghosts, spirits, or memories. You've left the windows closed tonight. The shoes are turned inward. The mirror stays draped in a shawl that smells faintly of rosemary and dust. And outside, the wind moves past the house without stopping. It has nothing to collect, Nothing left to follow. Even the shadows feel sleepy. Now curled in the corners, dozing off like cats warmed by long-forgotten sun, you feel your body settle deeper into the sheets, not heavier, not tired, just done, like a chapter that ends with a breath instead of a period. There's no fear anymore. Just a quiet space where stories fold themselves back into silence. You've walked through dreams. Let them echo. Let them pass, and now you're still. You don't need the bell. You don't need the oil. You don't even need the neek's breath. Just yet. Just this one. This slow, soft one. Right here, right now, sleep, if it comes. Won't ask permission, it'll just arrive. Sit gently beside you and wait until you stop noticing it. Like old friends, like breath, like peace. Good night.